Hello, everyone. My name is Aaron Christensen. This is Horror 101 with Dr. AC, and welcome to Scare-A-Thon 2025, benefiting the International Rescue Committee. And tonight we're going to be talking with some of the guys from Icons of Fright. They have a brand new book out called Icons of Fright, and it's 100 interviews with horror icons. And let's bring everybody in, and let's say hello to Mike Cuccinata.
Hello.
Robert V. Galuzzo.
Hello.
And rounding things out, Adam Barnick.
Thanks for having us on, Aaron. Good to meet you.
Thank you so much, everybody, for coming on in. I got a sneak peek at your book, and I have to say it immediately caught me in my sweet spot. Yes, and I'm gonna throw up your fancy trailer. I'll include that in the midst of our conversation here. As I was reading it, this really was the time when I was getting into horror, and my first book was just coming out, Horror 101, and I was going to conventions. Being dropped into your book is just kind of like this awesome time capsule. I know you have a podcast that's accompanying this as well, where you kind of talk about the origins. And Rob, I think you mentioned MySpace, and I was like, oh man, I remember MySpace. Like MySpace was the gateway to like finding all of your horror brethren online. You know, that was where I actually found a lot of people, that and like the IMDb horror boards. But let's talk a little bit about what the heck is Icons of Fright. Like I think for a younger generation, perhaps, which, you know, believe me, that's my demographic, folks. It's all the youngsters. But we talk about, you know, how this Icons of Fright, like where did all these interviews come from? Rob and Mike, I know you kind of like co-created the site as it was, but how did you two come to do that? And then we're going to talk about everybody's kind of like individual horror journeys.
Me and Rob, we grew up on Long Island. We both kind of lived separate lives until we sort of had a small circle of friends and we would encounter each other. And we ended up starting to go to the conventions together. But just slightly before that, we would go over to Rob's house and watch some movies. And Rob had this great collection of everything. He had this huge collection of horror movies, and we'd watch them. He'd project them on the wall in his house. He had this, one of the early projectors. And I just got this idea that we kept going to these conventions and having such a small sliver of time with the people that we were, there to meet. And I approached Rob with the idea of what if we had a little website, just something small, where we could have an excuse to spend maybe like 10, 15 minutes with somebody like, say, Betsy Palmer at the next Chiller convention. Maybe have a few words, get a few words in and publish them as interviews. And then we started talking about how best to approach that. Rob, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, we met through mutual friends, and the reason Mike and I kind of gravitated towards each other, I think, is because nobody loved horror. We'd never met another person that loved horror as much as the other. Okay, so I was the one and only person that was sneaking Fangoria in high school. No, everyone thought it was the weirdest thing ever, and Mike was the first person I met that understood my Dario Argento references and all that kind of stuff. So it was natural that we would have screenings together with friends and then go to the conventions. And as he said, we were kind of a little awkward at the conventions, as most of us are the first time we're going. And I had just taken I went to trade school to learn about computer graphics and web design, trying to get a job building websites. And I had no luck when I finished. And it kind of morphed into, well, I should build a website about something just so I know how to do it in practice. And Mike and I would go to the diner all the time, and we'd have all these conversations about films and different filmmakers and what we would ask them, etc. And I believe he's the one that coined the term Icons of Fright in one of these diner sessions. And I was like, that's it. Let's make the website Icons of Fright. I'll practice. I'll get practice on how to build and learn HTML and all that. And there was no real ambition, there's no career ambition whatsoever. He was managing a Hot Topic. I don't even remember what job I was doing at the time, maybe medical billing or something. And it just gave us an excuse to have a place, an outlet to talk to these, filmmakers or actors or people that we respected from the conventions. And, you mentioned MySpace. I can't remember if it was on the record or not. MySpace was pivotal in us starting this because that was the only way to communicate with other people. And I would get a hold of Ken Sagos on MySpace from Nightmare on Elm Street 3 and geek out when he wrote back saying, sure, I'd talk to you. So honestly, timing and naivety played a huge part in Icons of Fright's humble beginnings. But pretty quickly, we met people like Adam Barnick pretty early on, Jay Alvino, who's the other writer in the book. And we were kind of a little band. We just kind of we were all excited about doing this thing. And it was never, and it still is not a full-time job for us. It was always the thing we were excited to do at 5 p.m. when we got off our day jobs. At least that's how I felt about it. So that's the beginning. And and we started, the idea was a monthly magazine, right? Because we were reading horror magazines, and it's like, well, we can handle, with our work schedules and our 9 to 5, we can handle 4 interviews a month maybe, and a couple of quirky columns if we can think of some stuff to write about. So that's the beginning of it all.
And Adam, how did you come into the mix?
I think I came into the mix. I believe the site had already been going for at least a year and a half before I was involved. I knew about it because I was just like a young horror nerd and looking at all the sites back then. I started writing interviews for my own adambarnick.com site. I started something to just for that and to have some sort of post-film school presence, because it was getting to the point of hey, maybe someday we'll be able to put our shorts online, but I had the good fortune of I made a short horror film that Fangoria picked up for distribution on DVD, worldwide. And the timing was right around when this was going on. And I want to say, I feel like Rob and Mike reached out to me to interview me, because I know I was interviewed before we met in person and did a whole thing on the short horror film that was going to come out through Fangoria in a couple of months. And I think then they realized, oh, we know some of your interviews, because they were talking to some people that I had been talking to, like Dante Tomaselli and Stephen Mena, a lot of East Coast indie, Alan Rowe Kelly, people who, were making a go on the East Coast on their own. And they saw that I was really interested in doing smart, really in-depth interviews and not just ask the same 5 dorky questions that you would in line if you only had 2 minutes at a FangoCon. So I think they thought that we would be a good fit. And I ended up writing interviews for a couple of years subsequently from that time period.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty organic. We did. Adam was an interview on the site before he was a contributor to it, because obviously we wanted to talk to franchise alumni, people that were in Friday the 13th sequels and stuff like that. But we were excited because there were people like Stephen Mena made Malevolence on Long Island, and to us that was such a wow, somebody here made a horror film, and Dante Tomaselli doing it out of Queens, and we were so Jersey. We were so blown away. We were blown away by the Fangoria Blood Drive. That's the disc that Adam was on, because that was to us the future icons of Fright. We're like, oh, cool. There's all these up and coming filmmakers, and Fangori's, collecting them as shorts to put out. This is long before the short festivals and YouTube and all that stuff. So we thought, let's interview them so we could say that we talked to them first before they make their big movies and all that. So it all just happened organically, and it is a product of its time. Like that early 2000s era that we launched in 2004, and it was just like the 2 or 3 years after that was just such an amazing time for the genre and how it interacted with the genre online.
Well, and suddenly you were able to reach a broader audience than, say, the fanzine crowd. Like the fanzines, I think, were the precursor to the kind of websites that you're talking about, where, rather than just going to the conventions and have kind of a regional outreach, suddenly it was the World Wide Web, and you could be talking to people all over the world. That was one of the things for me on like the IMDb message boards. Is suddenly I was finding people who cared, like you said, who cared about horror as much as I did, who knew as much as I did, and oftentimes more. I was like, I used to think that I was the weirdo because I knew as much as I did. And suddenly I was talking with people who were way, they're talking Italian and Spanish and, Asian horror. And I was like, okay, and that's where kind of the Horror 101 came from, was me like, I need to go back to school here so I can hang with the cool kids. And what you're doing here in 2004, 2005, is as the site starts ramping up, is you're going to these conventions and you're having an opportunity to have the one-on-one. And I feel like there's something really cool about these interviews, because there's a bit of a timestamp on all of them. It is, where those actors and directors are at that point in their career. And I love the fact that the book kind of does go chronologically. So you go, okay, here's a timestamp of 2007, and we're talking to Tiffany Shepis. Where is she at in her career? Why a book now? I guess that's the burning question. Is what inspired the idea of putting them all together and putting them out?
It was timing. Honestly, 2024 was our 20th anniversary, which is scary to say out loud, but true. And Mike and I had talked several times over the years about, like, wouldn't it be cool to just put everything together in a book? But I think because of our jobs and our lives, it's easier said than done. But really, it was Dustin McNeil and Harker Press, who already are doing incredible horror-related books, the Taking Shape books. I believe Adam was aware of his first book, The Phantasm Exhumed. He's doing great horror-related books. And in passing in a conversation, I said to him, I was like, man, it's the 20th anniversary of Icons. I wish we could do a book or something. And without any hesitation, he's like, done. And I'm like, what? He's like, let's do an Icons book. And I'm like, really? And I introduced him to Mike and the rest of the team. And I was like, I think this is the guy that finally wants to help us make the Icons book. And it was as simple as that. It was timing. And, we spent, it's now 21 years. We spent a year working on it because, like you said, with so much material, it was a question of how to, we at one point we thought maybe we'll do all the franchise interviews together as chapters, but really chronologically made the most sense. So you could either follow because we get better at doing this. So you could either follow along, but also you could skip around. You can look at the index and decide, oh, you know what, I want to read this one right now. And like you said, what's been fun for us, because I don't think any of us have really looked at our interviews in the years since we've done them, but we weren't, no disrespect to the other horror websites, because that their bread and butter was news bits, and so they were looking for sound bites. We were always, it was Mike's philosophy from day one, is long form interviews. Bravo's inside the Actors Studio for the horror fan. And so that's what's fun about it now, is the mission was accomplished. I look back on Oz Perkins in 2006, and 15, 20 years before he's a director, talking about how Stanley Kubrick and Tim Burton made him want to direct. And now he has that career. So that was like the fun of going back and seeing where they were in that moment in time versus where they are now. Even James Wan, we talked to him before Dead Silence came out. So you read that and you're just like, whoa, dude, hold on tight, because you have no idea what's coming.
I think amazing. One thing that also inspired us is, smaller websites like ours just really don't exist anymore. And we've seen a lot of other media get gobbled up, and like horror websites, and get gobbled up by larger companies. And in a blink of an eye, all of your writing can vanish. They can
Mhm.
put that website out. And we've seen it happen to our friends who have like long writing careers and a vast amount of material that they publish, and it's just gone. And we just didn't want that to happen to this material, to these interviews. They're really precious to us. And I mean, we always controlled them. It wasn't like that could happen, but something goes wrong with a server. We got 20 years, we got a service stuff stored for 20 years on a web server. It was important for us to try to do what we could to preserve it and to get it into print, you know, and keep it around forever.
Now, do you think this appeals to a certain age group, perhaps, or do you think that there is kind of a universal appeal to it? I know, again, for me, this like really hit my sweet spot. This was right when, and I think, Rob, that's when you and I like met via either MySpace or Facebook. So it's like this was really when I was being able to connect with horror fans in a different way, in a one-on-one way via the internet.
I mean, I want to believe that it has an appeal to everybody.
Right.
At the end of the day, I know that fellow, us older folk refer to ourselves as monster kids. And I know it'll appeal to monster kids because we are still in a weird way looking for that thrill when we discovered famous monsters, Fangoria, etc. So I know the people our age will definitely enjoy it, but it's been fun to even see some of the younger people that have never seen these interviews or been influenced. And, everyone's story is different, how they became a director. And for all of us, I think that was also the exciting part of it, is getting to learn. It's our film school, and maybe it's somebody else's, getting to learn how certain people did certain things. To bring it up to speed, there's brand new stuff that I just did for the book. And it's 3 different unique filmmakers with incredible stories of how their careers launched. So I think that's just as relevant if you like Smile and Talk to Me and The New Final Destination as any of the older stuff that's in there.
I think it's been my experience too. It's just that horror fans in general, I mean, they may have sort of a favorite 10-year period, like someone's like 70s but they're always quite open and exploring other time periods. I know Gen Z folks who love Universal monsters that are in black and white. It's like, I don't see the cutoff of media interests that I do in other genres. With horror, it feels like, oh, I've gobbled up everything that was from the past 10 years. So what else is there,
Yeah. And there's definitely a sense of like being at a convention and getting to hang out with the celebrities of the time.
Right, but there's also we wanted to dive into their whole careers.
Yeah.
And just go back to like that Betsy Palmer interview. When we interviewed her, we talked to her about her studio days from the 50s and the 60s, the films she did with Joan Crawford. These are questions she may not have ever been asked. Certainly wouldn't have been asked at a convention Q&A, and maybe not in. Maybe she would have never had the opportunity to have a long form interview. No one was inviting her to things like Inside the Actor's Studio, and that goes for a lot of the talent that we interviewed. We really wanted to talk about stuff outside of just their genre work, talk about their training, talk about what drew them to the craft of acting or writing or directing, and who their influences were, and to introduce horror fans to their whole body of work, which you'll see in the book.
Once you become like a real student of the genre, those are the kind of things you want to know. I think one of you has a background in makeup effects.
Jay, who's not here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I remember when Jay was talking on the podcast about how that was kind of like his thing, is learning how the magic tricks happen. And I feel like the same thing is true for an actor or a director. You want to learn how they learn to do what they do, how they keyed into, tapped into who they are. I mean, when you're talking to like Robert Englund, you're like, where did you find Freddy? And, it's nice to ask that question, but it's also nice to ask all of the other questions going back predating Freddy and things that he's done since Freddy.
I felt like we had done, obviously all of us do individual interviews, we do them together, but I felt like we were always at our strongest when we were able to kind of do interviews together. And the thing that Mike doesn't get enough credit for, when we started the site, I was a pop culture monster nerd. I didn't really have that vast a knowledge of film history as I do today. And that's really what Mike brought to the table. Like, Mike knew about all those early Betsy Palmer things and the game shows she didn't, like, I had no idea about that stuff. So if anything, he kind of expanded my interest in film history in general outside of the genre, and people pick up on that. Again, Betsy told us the infamous story about how she only did Friday the 13th to buy a new car for whatever $99,000, whatever it was. But I guarantee nobody asked her about the game shows or being under contract at the studio and stuff like that. And I think people, again, she's gone now, so to me, it's a beautiful time capsule of her whole career versus just the fact that she was Mrs. Voorhees. There's more to her. There's more to every single person that we were fortunate enough to include because of that.
And I think that's also one of the blessings of it being written for the web was that there wasn't a word count. There wasn't a word limit. You could just dive in and keep going as long as your subject was willing to.
Yeah.
We certainly did. Spent several hours with some of the people, which was really a blessing and a privilege.
A blessing, but a terror to transcribe. Which
Yeah,
I don't miss that part at all.
No,
Mike and Rob, you knew each other. You connected over horror. But what was kind of your individual journey? Before you met one another. Like Mike, tell us a little bit about like what some of the movies were that were formative for you, and maybe the ones that scared you but gave you that special feeling that you wanted to get more of.
I always go back to Poltergeist. That's the first that when I was just a young one. That's the first horror movie I remember hearing adults talk about, and wanting to see it, wanting to experience it. And I remember, and we talked about this a little bit on the podcast, hearing two of my aunt's friends talk about how they couldn't look at the screen when they saw Poltergeist. They had to turn their head away, and I wanted to know what that was. Finally got to see it, and of course, it remained a huge influence on me. But also growing up in the era of like really cool late night cable, the era of the video store. This is where we discovered all of our favorite movies growing up. And it could be anything from something as silly as a trauma movie on USA Up All Night. I remember staying up late to watch Sorority Babes and the Slimeball Bowl-orama, David Dakota's wonderful trash classic, to like picking up Night of the Living Dead in the video store and finally getting to see that. A lot of just it felt like lore. People would pass these movies down to you and you had a chance to discover them then. So that's really what really got me interested and got me started on horror. Certainly my parents let me watch whatever I wanted, much to their regret sometimes when I would wake up in the middle of the night, but it was a crazy time. It was the 80s.
Yeah.
And then as we got older, we started getting introduced to the internet. I remember like news groups like alt horror, which don't that's long gone, these message boards where I first got introduced to like you said, like the IMDb message where we first got introduced to international horror, Asian stuff. That's where I first heard about Italian movies and started diving into those and going to conventions and buying, you had to buy bootlegs then, bootleg VHSs. It's the only way you get your hands on that stuff. There weren't screenings. You had to hope somebody had a third generation copy of Suspiria, at their table illegally. What about you, Rob?
Yeah, I mean, I've said it before, but in brief, I was a kid of the Universal monsters. I just always gravitated towards them. And then Freddy was my gateway because it was the era of Freddy Krueger. But then it was almost overwhelming. Like once you pass that threshold of a movie like Nightmare on Elm Street, and then even Michael Jackson's Thriller to a different extent, then it felt everywhere you looked, whether it was the video. Like I remember just going back and forth. I could walk to the video store, so I would go every day. I would rent 2 movies, watch them, go back and get the next 2, and it was everything from like a Scanner sequel to Night of the Living Dead or whatever. So we were like lucky that we just had so much access to it. But then there was that excitement. I distinctly remembered just earlier today that like when Anchor Bay was doing the clamshell VHS tapes of all the Argento movies one at a time, and that was the first time you could see an uncut Argento movie. Like they were finally putting them out on VHS. And the funny thing is, I don't think that feeling ever goes away. I mean, ironically enough, just last night I was updated. I've been updating older Icons articles that are not in the book for my website. Oh, so you could find a bunch of icon stuff there. And literally, I sent an article to Mike that he wrote about like horror comedies, and the first thing he writes about is student bodies. And we're texting, and God damn it, me and him watched it last night on Paramount Plus. Like, we went back and forth. He's like, it's like HD on Paramount Plus right now. And I was like, well, I guess I know what we're watching.
I gotta watch it.
And, you know, it's like that's kind of the vibe that I feel like both the site and the book. I hope the book makes people do that, where they stop and I'm like, well, now I got to see student bodies or whatever obscure movie they just referenced.
Adam, how about you?
My horror journey, I had sort of a couple of distinct little periods growing up. I you know, everyone sneaks a look around when your parents are watching something that you're not allowed to see. What's going to pique your curiosity more than stay in your room, you know? So I would see glimpses of creepy things, but my introduction to it really came from science fiction. I used to sneak watch like clips of the more horror oriented years of old school Doctor Who. My aunt got me this book about alien creatures, and it was all like the from the 50s B movies to like 70s, 80s scary stuff like Alien and beyond. So my introduction to anything, I guess, darker came from the sci-fi realm, and then it was just sort of like a cool casual thing in the background, and it didn't really bust out until like renting. I think Nightmare on Elm Street 3 was coming out to rent or something like that. Or what? No, I just was like, I had just started to learn about Freddy stuff and caught the first one on cable super late night. And then I was like, oh, they're already out. They made a couple of these. Let's go rent 3, you know, and then that actually sparked a makeup effects. I had a period where I thought that was an avenue I was going to go in, and did spend a lot of time studying and just trying to learn like the how and the why. And that's when I started figuring out by Fangoria right off the shelf and learn about this stuff too. And then I think I was working this one job and they had like, it was the Halloween display, and it was all like discounted classic films. And I was like, wow, I can just pick up 10 of these things for nothing. And that there was kind of no holds barred after that.
And you bring up an interesting point, all three of you, kind of like that there was this era of suddenly things were accessible that weren't existing on our radar, or things that we'd known about but had no means to watch. Now that we live in this day and age where it pretty much is instant access, how has that changed, do you think, horror fandom overall? The fact that you can kind of disappear into the weeds pretty quickly and never live in the mainstream, or you can live in the mainstream and never venture off.
Well, I'm not sure that's instant access is different than certain access. I mean, like a video store access. You know, when we would go to a video store back then, you know, there was that guy behind the counter who could introduce you to something.
Yeah.
And I found with the instant access, you can get lost in the weeds, but you never stop to watch anything half the time, right? You could spend 2 hours scrolling through descriptions of dozens of movies on Amazon Prime and never stop to hit play, because there's no curation. I think that's what's missing. The video store experience was curated. There's either a person or a section that you know what was there, and I mean, it was certainly access. It was more access than our parents had to these movies. If you picked something up and you took it home, you had to watch it, you know. And that's, I think, horror. I don't know. I'm not sure how. I know horror fandom now is there's certainly more. It's funny too. I'm in Brooklyn, and there are like 3 or 4 like horror screenings a week where fans are showing up to show up at a dive bar and watch a movie projected on the wall, because they're as much as we have all access to everything, they want to have access to fans and people, and they want to gather together as a community. And there's so much more of that happening now than there was back even in our day. This is like a whole new thing, and maybe it's coming out of COVID where we're locked in our houses for a year and where people are just craving community. But you know, you go to this dive bar, Lucky 13 here in Brooklyn, and watch they've just watched Session 9 last week, like to 30, 40 people, and it's crammed into the back of the bar. And that's incredible. You're seeing a lot more like small communities pop up today than you did back then. We were hard pressed to find anybody to hang out with, except G's house, you know.
I think when we were younger, and not just limited because of our age, but it's like the events where like if you'd lived it close enough to go to a horror convention once a year.
Yeah.
And that was it. Maybe it just, the industry hadn't exploded at the time where, now, like you said, it's can be like like an indie screening in a bar, or you'll have like repertories, midnight shows at the local theaters. There's a lot of different ways to experience it now, but I think what it is also really is people craving the communal aspect. It's fun to watch stuff at home, but it's also fun to watch stuff at home with 5 of your friends, so.
Right.
Yeah, I was just going to add that I think that it's not like our era was better than this or whatever. I just think it evolves in different ways. So for us, I feel like maybe it was a little more special when you finally tracked down a copy of Death Ship or Cannibal Holocaust or whatever, because you had read about it for so long. But now I think it's kind of cool that a kid can read something about David Cronenberg, for example, and they could probably go on a deep dive and find every one of his movies now streaming on some platform, starting at Criterion, onto Amazon Prime or whatever. And I think that's kind of cool. Like if you really want something, you really want to, get into it, you have, there's really hard to find movies now that you could just find on YouTube.
Right.
Which is kind of crazy to me. I think it's cool. I think it's cool the way it's evolved.
And Mike, I think you actually brought up a really good point, like the idea of these screenings. There is that idea of curation. Whoever is hosting that screening wants you to see this movie. And if that person wants you to see this movie and you trust them, if you've gone to another screening before and you're like, you know what, I really like that one. It's kind of like you learn to trust the programmer at a film festival.
Right.
You're like, okay, well, whatever they lay out there, I've never heard of it, or I didn't think I liked that movie, but they think it's worth seeing, so I'm going to go back and check it out. And I think that's also what you're doing here with this book, is you're creating, like these are some people's names that you should know. These are people who are important. They are, as the title says, icons within the genre. And I think it does create that kind of checklist where you're like, okay, I need to check out all of Cronenberg stuff. I need to check out, Ken Sagoes. What else has he done? You are curating for your audience.
Yeah, I'm going to keep working on it as this airs, but I created a letterboxed, I think it's called like Icons of Fright Essential recommendations for now. Basically, anything we mention in the book or the podcast, I'm trying to add on there because, of course, Friday the 13th 3 or whatever, but maybe you missed the Wizard of Gore remake by Jeremy Kasdan, which I think is a really cool little lost movie. Malevolence by Stephen Mena, who we mentioned earlier. It's been fun. Dead and Breakfast, which is the reason we talked to Oz Perkins in the first place. There were a lot of cool movies from that era that were coming out that I don't want to say they were forgotten, but it just feels like that it's not as well documented a decade as other horror decades. So if we, if we could shine the spotlight on some of those cool movies that we were advocating for, then I think that's awesome.
I think there's some names in there too that you may find you think you know a little bit about, but you're going to find more about. Someone like Katt Shea, who you may be familiar as the director of The Rage Carrie 2, but you should know more about her. There's a lot more that she's done than you'll find out in the book. That's important. That she was really behind the scenes in film for quite a few years, and she's doing stuff like Strip to Kill, and it gives you an opportunity to learn more about names you think maybe you might have been a little dismissive of.
Yeah, Katt Shea being a director for Roger Corman at that point in
Roger
time.
Corman, yeah.
There weren't that many
from that school.
There
weren't that many women. There weren't that many women directors coming up out of the Roger Corman era either. So she's very important.
Well, and I think what you're doing here, by the fact that you chose to interview them, you are already shining a light on them. And it's kind of like when you create a nice cluster of recognizable names, and then you sneak somebody else in who's maybe a little lesser known, they take on more importance because they are in that same company.
I think about Jeff Burr all the time when we put him in that book, in our book. One of our best interviews we've ever did. We spent several hours with him. Jeff Burr's director of The Stepfather 2, From Whisper to a Scream.
To me, he was a hero to me. I waited outside the movie theater at 15 to see Leatherface, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3.
Yeah.
I didn't know that it was cut to pieces and that it was a compromised movie. I had the best time ever because as a kid, it meant a lot to me. And then I noticed that he did a lot of these horror sequels in that period, just Puppet Master 4 and 5, like just cool stuff. And so, yeah, we met him through mutual friends on one of our trips to Los Angeles. And he sat with us and for like hours and was so candid. He was so candid about everything that at one point I said to him, "Are you allowed to say this?" And he's like, "It's America, baby. I can say whatever I want." and I was just like, "Well, that's Jeff for you." And yeah, and he's, look, he's no longer with us, and that one really hurt. Rereading the interview and putting it in the book was kind of one of the main reasons we did this. Is like, man, because he did a lot of personal, like From a Whisper to a Scream, which I believe Scream Factory has put out on Blu-ray, is a great little horror anthology. He did a couple of personal films like Eddie Presley. Eddie Presley's great. I mean, there's a bunch of little, I love all the horror sequels too. But there's some fun little bits that he did in between that really meant a lot to him. And it's like,
what's that World War II movie he did?
Straight Into Darkness.
Yes. Yeah.
That's, I mean, another cool little flick. And that's the thing. It's like, I think part of our pre-IMDb brain would, people like me, Mike and Adam would find a filmmaker and like, but have you seen that one obscure World War II movie they did? And it's like, well, no, I guess I have to see that now too. There's a fun in that too, is almost kind of the checklist of each. Well, I love this movie that this person made. Now I have to see these other ones. So yeah, I think it'd be fun to make a checklist out of what you find in here that you've never seen before.
Kind of going back to what you were saying about kind of the 2000s being a little bit of a lost era. I think that's true. I feel like from like 2006 to 2012, there were so many great movies that were coming out that people do talk about in the way that I thought they would. I was talking about Pontypool with somebody the other day. And they'd never heard of it. They'd never heard of it. And I was at a convention saying, hey, we're going to be doing an episode on Pontypool. And they're like, what's that? I would have never dreamed that there was a time when Pontypool wouldn't be on everybody's lips. But those movies have, they have kind of fallen off the radar for people.
Well, it was the end of the DVD era and just, on the cusp of streaming where everything became available. So it was, and these films weren't getting theatrical releases like they weren't getting wide releases. So as DVD was, fading and streaming was rising up, you have this sort of donut hole of like roughly 2006 to 2012. Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of those films,
Behind the Mask is another one, right?
Well, I think a lot of those were in the era of where there were an abundance of horror websites, right? And so they weren't really getting immortalized in print. Like Fangoria would cover, maybe there was a little thing about Pontypool and Fangoria, but my point being is to what Mike said earlier, it's like, yeah, these are all on websites that have ceased to exist, and now that content has disappeared into the ether.
Disappeared.
So you can't really find much about it anywhere anymore. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I know people were ragging on that era as it was happening, as they were like, "Oh, it's not as good as Italian horror of the '80s." Whatever, but I think every decade has some really cool stuff. So,
but I'm glad that again, kind of going back to the book, I love the fact that you are shining a spotlight directly on that era, and that people are going to be going, "Oh, what's that? What's Nightmare Man? What are these?
Fantastic.
What's Poltergeist? Like." There are going to be movies that people have not thought of or haven't heard of, and they're going to be seeking them out. So I think you're doing a terrific public service here. I do want to come back around. It seems like all of you kind of came to horror in an isolated kind of way. Was there somebody who was kind of guiding you? Like, did you have an older brother or an uncle or a, misguided video store clerk?
Gilbert Gottfried and Rhonda Shear.
Yeah, I was going to say sometimes it's not necessarily a close personal person. It's media. Like Fangoria was what recommended stuff to me, and I did have in high school like two other mutual friends. I even mentioned them in the book dedication, who we would pass that Fango around and find out like, oh, this thing's coming out in 2 or 3 months. Let's go see it together. And but in terms of having someone who was sort of like a elder gatekeeper kind of thing. For me, it really was the magazines, or something you just hear about at a convention. So in a way, I guess Tony Timpone would have been that, because you go there and he's like that's where you went to see trailers. It's like, you know, now it seems like, what do you mean you had to wait to see trailers? But we did, you know, you'd have to get there early and get a seat, and then hope that if you were there late, they'd show them again on Sunday. But it was also when the studios, they chose, it was like a Comic-Con, like they're like, we're premiering the trailer at this thing. So be there or wait 6 months till you get to see it in front of another movie, you know?
Yeah, the Fangoria Weekend of Horrors back then was the first hour of it. You'd be in the ballroom, and it was either Tony or Michael Gingold introducing a succession of trailers for all the films that were going to be coming out over the next year, including some that Michael Gingold himself would have written. So that's where you really see what was up and coming. And again, it was the video era, so these weren't, a lot of them weren't getting wide releases in theaters. It's just something about, you'd have to then go think about them and remember them and track them down, you know, in the months to come.
That's so funny. You reminded me of a very vague memory of an early Fangoria where Michael Gingold was hosting the trailers, and I think he showed the trailer to Leeches.
Leeches, who wrote this? Who wrote this crap? I did.
If you're wondering who writes this crap, that would be me. I remember thinking, like, that's the coolest thing ever. Yeah, no, just like the guys. I mean, I think I was the one, and maybe we all have this in common. Like, yeah, I had some cousins that showed me Nightmare on Elm Street, but they weren't into horror the way. Like, I took it to the next extreme. I was the one that then would seek out this stuff. And my family was supportive for the most part, even though they didn't understand it. But I remember whatever my first Fangoria Weekend of Horrors was, which I was probably 13 or 14. I can't remember. My brother took me on the Saturday. And I loved it so much. We had two young cousins staying with me from Argentina that were definitely not of age. And I convinced them to take me again Sunday, just so I had somebody older than me to get me in. And it was like, that's my obsession, is that immediately I would rally the troops and go again. I don't know how I did this, but I do remember the night that Friday the 13th 7 New Blood came out, because near my high school, we had a threeplex, the Lawrence RKO trio, whatever. And you know, we're 15. We're not old enough to get into a rated R movie. I convinced our guidance counselor. I was so excited to see this movie that Jason was going to fight a telekinetic girl. I convinced the guidance counselor to meet us with her boyfriend, and it was 10 kids. And that night, she got us all in to see Friday the 13th 7. And it was like, that was the thing. It was like, even from a young age, I was like, how did I talk them all into this?
How
like,
old are you, Rob?
Well, when did that one come out? 87? 80?
Yeah.
I was like 11 or 12.
Yeah.
80, I'm 12. So the fact that, like, I convinced our guidance counselor to get us in was like, and by the way, it was like the greatest night ever. People talk smack about that movie, but when you're that age with 10 other kids and you're not supposed to be there, it was like the greatest battle in cinematic history. So,
and being that we're into October now, with, you know, Halloween season upon us, I want to kind of toss out what are some like great Halloween movies. They can either be ones that you love to watch in October, or ones that are, you know, set around Halloween, something that gives you that Halloween vibe, and that you would recommend to viewers.
Okay. Yeah. I thought about this, and almost all of my list, actually, the things do take place on Halloween. I mean, one of my favorite things that I've always loved about horror is atmosphere and the different ways that narrative storytelling can show it. And you'll never find a more creative way to show atmosphere than in all the different ways it's done in horror. I mean, for newer films, I would definitely start with Trick or Treat. I mean, yes, it's Halloween, but I mean, that movie, just like I want to step into it every time I watch it, and just like, why can't skies look like this in my real life? You know, it's just such a beautifully designed film. And actually, I live in Vancouver now, and but I didn't know until I'd been here 2 years, they shot it here. So I was immediately like, I have to go to the locations at the right time. I mean, Trick or Treat, you can't do better than that for Halloween, but it plays well in April too, you know. The second one, I would go a little older back. I would pick Pumpkinhead, which isn't a Halloween film, but absolutely feels like it. It feels like a October campfire tale in every frame. Larry Fessenden's Habit, which we're all huge fans of. That's New York in the autumn, and that is a Halloween Yeah, it's not a Halloween story, but some of it does take place then, and then goes into the Thanksgiving hangover. But it's just that I moved into New York City just before fall one year and discovered that film at exactly the right time. And I even lived a block away from one of the locations in it. And I was just like, this has been just handed to me to just love and consume. But that's a great Halloween one to visit. In terms of just atmosphere, and I wouldn't say it's the, a classic, but I love its strange atmosphere is House of a Thousand Corpses. That just feels like one of those lurid horror comics you got at a flea market, and just that's a one where to me the design of it is just exquisite. And my last one, which is funny because in it being more lo-fi, actually has some of the strongest atmosphere, in my opinion, of all, is the Blair Witch Project. I grew up on the edge of the woods, and like I still like that. I have to talk myself into watching that movie every year. It's just like it works my nerves, and I'm just wired in a way that's probably the scariest film I've seen. But it takes place around Halloween. It just is as fall's rolling in, so it's a good one to watch. I know some people are like, this movie's okay, but to me, that's just like, real life scary, even though it isn't.
I wanted to piggyback on something that Adam said because he had mentioned Pumpkinhead. One thing that I don't do, but my friend Scott Reynolds does. Shout out to him. He likes curating these double features, these interesting horror themed double features. So I remember one Halloween, he actually showed the original Frankenstein with Pumpkinhead, and I know that doesn't seem like it seems like an odd pairing, but really it's about somebody creating a monster and losing control of them. And I just flashed back to that when Adam mentioned Pumpkinhead. So I wanted to mention that because I love when people do that sort of thing. Just like we also did the Old Dark House with House of a Thousand Corpses, because I think they're watching the Old Dark House in that movie. Yep. So like nerdy double features, I'm a big fan of. In general, this is the time of year I love any monster matches. And what I mean by that, if it's got more than 2 monsters, I want to see it. Obviously, Abbott and Costello Frankenstein, the Monster Squad, House of Frankenstein is what I come back to quite a bit. And then some of like the even weirder, like the Monster Club. Like there's weird stuff too that just has like how it makes me feel Halloween-y. And then every year I have a different, I think everyone has some sort of theme. They do 31 days of something or whatever. One year I did 31 days of horror anthologies. And I don't think I'll ever beat that because it felt like I watched 100 some odd.
That's right.
In a month, and it was awesome. So I would strongly recommend, and trust me, there is more than 31 horror anthologies out in the world, so you can curate this beautifully. But I would recommend as many horror anthologies this month as possible, because even if there's a dud of a segment, like there's still probably some really good stuff there, and you're still gonna have a good time. So. Monster Masters horror anthologies. And for me personally, this year, I recently picked up a Thai horror box set from Umbrella, Australian company. And I'm a big fan of Asian horror, but it's been interesting because Thai horror has a slightly different skew to it than Japanese horror and all that. So it's been fun to discover something new like that. So that's going to be this October's new discovery for me.
Yeah, we just did a horror anthology episode on our Streaming and Screaming. The idea of like trying to hang on to like all of the little stories within it. One of the projects I'm going to be doing this October is I got the box set for Tales from the Dark Side. And so I'm going to be watching all of those. But there's also the Spanish anthology series, Tales to Keep You Awake. So there's 31 of those. So I'm playing on one of those every day, and then as many Tales of the Dark Side that I need to jam in there. But yes, that's a great suggestion. I love the anthology idea. Mike, how about you? What's your Halloween picks?
I have to be steeped in the season. I want to be steeped in the season, the autumn air. I want to feel that in the movies that I'm watching. I always start the Halloween season off with James Whale's Bride of Frankenstein. The classic Universal. I think I like it better than the original one. I love the characters. I love Dr. Pretorius. I love the tombs and the castles and the fog of it all. It is just it's so atmospheric and wonderful. I cannot start October without watching it. And then I like to get into like cozy, spooky stuff. My second pick would be Robert Wise's The Haunting, which is, you got to watch that in the dark, in the night, and it's such a great haunted house movie, and it's very simple in many ways. It's just creaking, sound effects, shadows, and it's remarkable. My third pick is John Hancock's Let's Scare Jessica to Death. If you want a movie that makes you feel the autumn air, watch that movie, with also this phenomenally like vulnerable performance by Zora Lampert in that movie as Jessica. I think it's New England atmosphere. They're up there. There's no leaves on the trees, and you feel they're in this just rundown house, and it's something of a vampire story. No spoilers. I don't want to ruin the movie, but I love that one. I always have to watch Fulci's City of the Living Dead. I love that one with all this wind in that movie. I love the wind in Fulci's City of the Living Dead. And then finally, I think I always have to close it out with John Carpenter's The Fog.
Nice.
For another cold, like crisp night. That was another one that used to run on TV all the time. The channel WPIX used to show here in New York, used to show Carpenter's The Fog every Halloween on a weekend sometime. And no Halloween season is complete without it.
Well, and it turns out City of the Living Dead is a Halloween movie.
And it is a Halloween movie. Yeah. Yeah.
Actually, they just don't celebrate Halloween in Dunwich. Right. Because every day is Halloween.
Every day.
Finally, are there any like kind of like fun Halloween events? They can be parties, they can be festivals. What's something this October that you're specifically looking forward to, other than, of course, the launch of your book and the podcast?
Oh, I'm looking forward to Brooklyn Horror Fest. That's been going on since 2016. It's an all horror film festival here in Brooklyn in the last 2 weeks of October. David Kitterich's documentary on The Exorcist 2, Borman and the Devil, is screening, and I could not be more excited for any film coming up. I'm a huge Exorcist 2 fan, and I've known David for a couple of years. I know he's working on it, and I just cannot wait to get my eyes on it.
Great. Robert, how about you?
Not really, other than continuing to watch Horror 101 episodes on YouTube, of course. No, I'm pretty low key nowadays. I will definitely curate some sort of some screenings with friends here. I haven't decided what yet. One year I did do a Frankenstein day. I think this was about 2 years ago, where it started at 11 a.m. and just showed 6 Frankenstein themed movies in a row, and just had people come and go how they pleased. It was like in late October, and that was amazing because it was the original Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, Abbott and Costello Meet the Wolfman, Monster Squad, Frankenhooker, and then Weird Science. So I really skewed the Frankenstein towards the end and made it, some pretty crazy picks. But I'm just going to be watching a lot of movies this and reading as much as I can this October.
'Tis the season. Adam, how about you?
Let's see. I've got 2 big post-production deadlines coming up in October, so if I can find the time to carve a pumpkin, I'm going to feel blessed. But what I will say is that in terms of like going out to October events, Halloween literally on the street in the neighborhood I live in is epic. We don't have to go more than 2 or 3 blocks because everyone comes to us, all the kids. The houses around here, a couple of like, they call them heritage houses, like historical ones that have really stood the test of time. They absolutely trick out, and like all the Halloween eye candy is going to be, I can literally throw a stone to hit it. So I get to kind of stay local and enjoy the 31st of October that way.
Thank you all so much. I wish you all the success with this book and your podcast. And I think with any good book, even if you weren't there, it feels like you were there. And that's quite a nice magic trick. So best of luck with that, guys.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us. Thank you for having us, Aaron.
Yeah, and I'll have all the links below to where you can purchase the book, find the podcast, and of course, because this is in service of our Scare-A-Thon 2025, the link to donate will be below in the description of this video. Thank you all so much, and keep searching, keep exploring. Have a fantastic Halloween season. keep sharing the scare.